Chapter 4. Cues for Copywriters. The copywriter said, "Look, I write a piece of copy. I show it to one boss and he says it's wonderful. I show it to another and he says it's lousy. Who's right, and what do I do now?" It seems to Aesop Glim that there are only two possible answers. If the copy was wrong, then the man who said it was lousy was 100% right. If the copy was right, then the man who said it was lousy was just a temperamental so-and-so. Let's first get rid of the temperamental so-and-so. Such people exist. They have chronic blind spots. They approach nothing with open minds. They see everything through their own particular set of biases. If they are good guessers, they achieve some measure of success. If they are poor guessers, they don't go too far, which is a great consolation. But they do exist. Sometimes they acquire a measure of authority. And the only way for you to deal with a temperamental so-and-so who has authority is outwit him. You'll have made your own study of his weaknesses. There was once a young copywriter who would go in and borrow $10 from his boss about a half hour before he was ready to submit his copy. This made the boss feel kindly toward the young man, and the copy usually went through very easily. A few days later, the junior would repay the debt, often with the same bill he had borrowed. Another difficult customer could always be managed if the submission of the copy was preceded by some discussion of either archery or Italian grammar. However, Aesop Glim does not advise you to assume automatically that your boss is a temperamental so-and-so, solely because he doesn't always like the copy you write. His being the boss presupposes seniority of experience or greater responsibility. Forgetting the temperamental so-and-so, it seems fair to say that when two reasonably honest and intelligent people disagree on a piece of copy, the reason can be discovered. Maybe they're both guessing and both have guessed wrong. Maybe one is right and doesn't know it. Maybe the one who is right hasn't prepared his case and therefore hasn't either the evidence or the confidence with which to convince the other. Aesop Glim believes that most advertisements are experimental. No matter how great the past record in the advertising of a given product, there is always the opportunity to try for a finer record. We know so little about advertising that there is always the possibility that some present all-time record is still only 80% of the true potential. No living man or woman will ever be able to say truthfully that he knows all there is to know about advertising. Most of its secrets are yet to be discovered. Experiment must be our standard practice. But experiment does not automatically mean guessing. A great deal of the guesswork can be taken out of copywriting. The bright boys and girls are those who have discovered that a lot of time and tears can be saved by a consistent attempt to be right the first time. This means thoroughness in the groundwork before you start to write. It means that you're going to seek to know as many facts as are knowable. You're not going to start writing until you are sure that there are no more facts to be had. Then you're still not going to start writing until you have thoroughly absorbed those facts, until you're saturated with them, until they are a part of you. When the facts in the case are just as much your own personal repertoire as your convictions about Santa Claus and the stork, then you are ready to commence to start to write. At this point, you will be so full of ideas and convictions that the words will be almost self-generating. It is surprising how often a disagreement about copy between two people of goodwill is a dispute over the use of words and punctuation. More often than not, this signifies that the copy contains more words and punctuation than it does ideas. Once again, lack of groundwork. Once you subscribe to the policy of getting saturated with facts before you start to write, your next step is to be certain that you write directly to those to whom the advertising is truly addressed. The whole theory of advertising is that you have a specific message to deliver to a specific audience. Don't ever lose sight of this fact when you're doing the actual writing. Don't let any thoughts of what the boss wants or how he would say it enter your head. You must attain the frame of mind to believe that the people to whom you are writing are right in the room with you. You can't quite speak to them, but they read what you write as fast as you write it. Keep asking yourself what meaning your audience can take out of each sentence. Can they take out the meaning you think you're putting in? What thought or action on their part will each sentence induce? If you do this accurately, your copy rings true. And one of the pleasant consolations of being a copywriter is the fact that most people hear the true ring when it's there to hear. Even a temperamental so-and-so sometimes yields and blesses your work. First, last, and all the time, write to a copy policy. It is potentially your greatest ally. It serves as the diagram or blueprint to which you write your copy. But even more important, it is the means by which you sell and even pre-sell your copy to your boss. Your copy policy defines the audience to which you are writing, establishes the relative importance and the sequence of all the points to be made in each piece of copy. Once you and your boss are in agreement on these, the copy is bound to be pretty much as he expects it to be. Moreover, he's now going to spend his time checking to see whether each piece of copy conforms to the copy policy. Thus, he is far less apt to start worrying as to why you used this word instead of that one, or why you punctuated as you did. The copy policy keeps your boss's eye and your own on the main target. Lastly, get the habit of challenging your own copy before you show it to anyone else. Challenge it for credibility and sequence and wording and punctuation before you give anyone else a chance to do so. 20 years ago, there were few discussions of advertising copy which didn't ultimately get around to the negative versus the positive approach. Shall we show a picture of the wallflower who did not go to dancing school? You're the social success who did? Is it more arresting to picture the person who needs a deodorant or the one who uses it? Shall our life insurance advertisement start with the picture of the dispossessed widow or the family that was provided for? Those who supported the negative side usually claimed that the horrible and the unpleasant provided the more vivid, more arresting subjects. Those who supported the positive approach contended that their method provided the shorter, more direct road to the point of sale. The fact that debates on negative versus positive are not as frequent as formerly does not alter the fact that the subject is still with us. For almost any goods or services we advertise, we have the choice of picturing either what the prospect lacks or the joy that could be his if he availed himself of what we offer. A quick look through current issues of leading periodicals will suggest that the positive is now being used more often than the negative. This does not weaken the case for those who like the negative approach, but there are 3 factors which always need consideration when you are planning on a negative picture. First, will this negative picture be so unpleasant that our prospect will be prompted to turn the page before he has read our copy? Second, will our negative picture be so unpleasant that our prospect will fear to have anyone see him reading it? Third, will our negative picture set up such an unpleasant association in our prospect's mind that he will be reluctant to consider our wares? Fourth, does starting with the negative side of the story put an unnecessary extra step into our construction? We want our advertisements to have just as much arresting power as possible, provided the arresting power doesn't somehow act as an end in itself and thereby prevent a reading of our copy. As far as we can generalize, we might say that the positive approach makes our prospect want something, resolve to do something, whereas the negative approach makes him dislike something, makes him resolve to stop doing or stop omitting to do something. In mathematics, a double negative makes a positive. We can't be sure this will always be true in copy construction. Our choice between negative and positive is rarely simple, rarely automatic. Our advertisement is non-existent if without arresting power. We must be sure to stop our reader, but it is even more important that we stop him in such a frame of mind that we then get a chance to sell him. Of course, there are some compromises between the wholly positive and the all-out use of the negative. One advertisement pictured 2 attractive young ladies discussing whether to invite a certain careless young man to their party. Can we call this a negative approach but with a positive picture? An insurance advertisement starts with an ideal picture of 2 men on a fishing expedition, in full regalia. But one man then proceeds to tell the other a very unpleasant story. Once again, a negative story, but a positive main illustration. Many of our cartoon strip advertisements start with the negative story and proceed step by step to build the positive picture. This suggests the fact that we may have forgotten the genesis of the cartoon strip. Going back 20 and more years, a very large number of advertisements had 2 illustrations. They were before and after. Aesop Glim believes that this formula has never outlived its usefulness. Striving always for novelty, we have abandoned it in its pristine form and pristine strength. Before and after, then and now, the wrong way and the right way. These basic double illustrations have power. If you want to sell your dentifrice to a man, you can picture bad teeth. Whereupon he can say, "Mine aren't perfect, but they aren't that bad." Or you can picture beautiful teeth and hope to inspire him to make his more like the beautiful teeth. But why not show him both the bad teeth and the perfect teeth? Show him the horrible example to avoid and also the ideal for which to strive. Our illustration of and by itself has provided a sense of direction. We have made full use of the negative or scare appeal, but almost simultaneously we have promised him the solution to his problem. Why picture only the perfect fitting, elegant-looking clothing? Why not also the wrinkled, binding, uncomfortable garments? In life insurance, why not picture both the widow who takes in washing and the one who doesn't? By this formula, we do much more than double our arresting power. We do more than take advantage of two kinds of arresting power. We virtually force our prospect to ask himself, which do I choose? On your next copy assignment, try your hand at the before and after treatment. Your illustrations need not be bromidic. They need not be simply two square pictures foiled against each other. They can be of different sizes and with different emphasis. One might be little more than a vignette, but adequate to suggest the other way. Your treatment might be symbolic rather than realistic. A dog food advertisement pictures, literally half a dog, to symbolize the dog that is only half nourished. This is foiled by a picture of a whole dog. Always remember that there is a difference between a fundamental and a technique. For copywriting purposes, we will say that the difference is that between what to do and how to do it. The before and after device is a fundamental. Don't let the desire for something new lead you to drop this fundamental. Spend your energies on finding new methods, new techniques for handling this old fundamental. Shakespeare said, "Comparisons are odorous." An old proverb says they're odious. When we compare our wares with those of our competitors in our advertising, the comparisons are undoubtedly odorous to our competitors. Whether our prospect finds our comparisons odious or helpful may depend upon our technique. If we imply that our prospect is a fool to be using some competitor's wares when he could be enjoying the unique benefits of our wares, we have undoubtedly overplayed our hand. If, on the contrary, we imply that our competitors' wares are pretty good, but claim that ours are better, we run the risk of having our prospect decide that he might just as well stick to the goods he knows about. After all, we've admitted that they're pretty good goods. Quite obviously, the only effective comparisons will be those which are somehow constructive and helpful to our prospect. The comparison must tell him something he didn't know, give him information by which he can benefit, and do it in a manner which earns belief. The prospect must be convinced that the advantages of our wares are true advantages and not simply boastful claims. It's always difficult to steer a course between a Scylla and a Charybdis of this sort. And there is also the fact that comparisons really are odious to some of our prospects, even when the information we have to offer is potentially helpful information. With this combination of both negative and positive reasons, Aesop Glim believes that, more often than not, it is sound practice to ignore your competition. Omit all reference to competitive wares when writing about the features of your wares. Tell your own story, exclusively positively. Give your copy sound construction, sequence, and conviction, and you'll get your share of the market. However, there are times when the decision is made that the advertisements shall be competitive, so we need a ground rule to cover the situation at such a time. The all-important rule, one that Aesop Glim considers inviolable, is knock out your competitors' wares before you display your own. In essence, you're going to say, ordinary widgets have these weaknesses. Say that, get completely through with all the details of that subject, before you go on to say, by contrast, Schmaltz's widgets are thus and so. Don't say, Schmaltz's widgets are thus and so, whereas ordinary widgets have these weaknesses. You want your prospect to come to the end of your story with a strong, positive conviction regarding your wares, so be sure your sequence first presents the weaknesses of ordinary widgets, then presents and leaves your prospect with the strong, positive picture of the advantages of Schmaltz's widgets. Work from the negative to the positive, never from the positive to the negative. This principle applies to the sequence of your copy story. It applies equally and inviolably to your layout if you use comparison pictures. Comparison pictures are those which contrast then and now, before and after, the old way and the new way, the wrong way and the right way. Make those pictures read from left to right or top to bottom. The negative picture on the left or top, the positive picture on the right or bottom. Once again, in pictures as in words, lead your prospect from the negative to the positive. Leave the prospect with the strong, positive picture of the advantages of Schmaltz's widgets. The violation of this rule has produced many an advertisement, which was appreciably weaker than it would have been if the rule had been observed. Once in a while, you see an advertisement that is exceedingly impressive. You stop and begin to read it. Suddenly, you become aware of the fact that it is impressive and nothing more. In illustration, layout, and headline, this advertisement is rich in arresting power. You start to read the copy, then you quit for no apparent reason. Except, perhaps, that the copy doesn't quite seem to say anything. The whole advertisement was overstaged and underwritten. Most often, in a case like this, the name of the advertiser is not even remembered, because no one ever got far enough into the advertisement to find out who was trying to say what. This is, of course, a blessing for the advertiser. If his name were remembered, the memory would probably be more unpleasant than favorable. The reader would be inclined to say, "How silly or how ostentatious of the Schmaltz Widget Company to run an advertisement like that." There are at least 5 easy ways to produce advertisements which are overstaged and underwritten. The first is already indicated. Not enough copy story, not enough facts and ideas to back up a pretentious front. This is something like the old simile of loading up a gigantic cannon, probably with a good deal of ceremony, only to have it go off with the thin crack of a cap pistol. We all agree that it is the primary function of the headline, layout, and main illustration to stage the copy message. Get a reading for the copy message. Obviously, the copy must be worthy of its build-up. Otherwise, the reader suddenly stops reading. His interest just plain evaporates. For a second cause, we can frequently spot a weak or faulty transition. Quite often, it is necessary to go somewhat afield in order to establish a common meeting ground with those whom we wish to interest in our wares. In order to get our prospects over into our own yard, we then lead them step by step from the broad subject used to attract their attention to the specific subject of our wares. Obviously, the transition must be sure, plausible, logical, easy to take. There are agencies in which certain copymen specialize in writing nothing but transitions. At the least, this emphasizes the great importance of having a sound transition. However, the idea of specializing in transitions sounds to old Aesop Glim, like the man who specialized in painting only the insides of red front doors of new white houses. A good painter ought to be able to see the house as a whole, and to work on almost any part of it. That is, of course, a matter of opinion, and one which does not affect our moral. Make certain that your transition is sure, plausible, logical, easy to take. A third route to overstaging lies in the beguiling search for newness as an end in itself. Old Aesop Glim says that the desire to be different, solely for the sake of being different, is one of the most dangerous desires an advertiser can have. That way madness lies. Remember the advertising man who discovered that a big pink bow on a box of candy helped the sale of candy? He was seeking a way to be different about automobiles. He succeeded by being the first man ever to put a big pink bow on an automobile. His idea was truly and absolutely different. He overlooked the fact that gift packages are an important part of the candy business, but not necessary to the automobile business. When an advertiser or copywriter sets out to find the thing no one else has ever done, he is on the road to defeat. By eliminating everything every other advertiser in the field has ever done, the chances are that he cheats himself out of using all the basic reasons for which people buy his wares. What is it your customers buy? Why do they want your goods? If you depart by 1 inch from the primary answers to these basic questions, you are going to find yourself divorced from all your strongest sales weapons. People want salt because it is salty. It is foolish to omit that fact from your sales story just because someone else has already said that his salt is salty. It's almost equally foolish to hunt for a lot of other sales arguments. None will be as basic. Saturate yourself with the facts of what your product offers and the facts of what your prospect wants. Mate those two sets of facts sensibly and write your copy policy. You will get your share of the business. Seek a new dress for your message if you wish, but don't leave out any of the basic facts. Don't invent new and wholly artificial sales arguments. A fourth cause of overstaging lies in making the illustration too important, bordering on making it something in itself. Your illustration is rarely an ornament. It should usually have an idea in it. That idea certainly points to the desirability of reading the copy. If circumstances permit, that idea also points to the desirability of possessing the goods advertised. Don't give anyone a chance to say, "That's a swell picture." It's a swell picture only if it makes people want to read the copy and/or buy the goods. A fifth source of overstaging comes from maximizing or minimizing our subject. We will always make a mistake if we try to make our product sound much more important or much less important than our prospect rates it. The manufacturer who advertised "this 5-cent lead pencil won the war" would be discredited. Users don't attach that much importance to their 5-cent lead pencils. But conversely, don't be humorous or nonchalant about the guns and tanks and bombs that did have something to do with the victory. The tone of voice in your copy must match the importance your prospect attaches to your proposition. If you want to get your full money's worth out of this section, it is suggested that you first get yourself a copy of your favorite magazine or business paper. Run through the issue and select, by your own tests and standards, the 5 best pieces of advertising copy and the 5 worst. For the moment, don't let the headlines, illustrations, or layouts guide your choice. Make your selections solely on the basis of the body text of the advertisements. Do this before you read further. Olio is a word which has been showing up all too frequently in crossword puzzles. It means medley, potpourri, mixture, or olla podrida. This last is a Spanish stew made of cabbages, carrots, peas, and bacon. In the theater, olio is the term for a vaudeville bill. In short, at its best, olio means a mixture or a hash or a series of unrelated events. At its worst, it suggests a mess. Aesop Glim proposes that olio be adopted into advertising parlance to describe a piece of advertising copy which, at its best, is all mixed up and, at its worst, a mess. Now take a look at the 5 advertisements which you have selected as worst. How many of them fall into the olio category? Much of the copy to which we are ready to give a low rating is copy which is confused and confusing. The writer was confused in his writing, and the reader is confused in trying to find the writer's meaning. Olio copy sachets. It does not make its points in a logical sequence. We might say that it gives a sample of point 1, then a bit of point 5, then a bit of point 2, then another bit of point 1, then possibly points 3 and 4, followed by some more of point 5, and quite likely ending up with a bit more of point 1. By contrast, the skillful writer, like the skillful speaker, presents his points in a logical or plausible sequence. He presents point 1 first and gets through with point 1 before he goes on to point 2. His audience follows him with a minimum of conscious effort and therefore a minimum of resistance. He wins a maximum of acceptance. We will digress for a moment in order to register one notable exception to these last 2 paragraphs. Aesop Glim is all for copy which, in its wind-up, refers back to and justifies its lead. In order to get the attention of our audience, we must frequently open up with a subject which is somewhat removed from our main topic. It is often necessary to offer our audience some attention-getting bait. There must, of course, be a plausible connection between what we use for this attention-getting bait and the topic to which we are primarily attempting to direct our reader's attention. Our reader must never feel that he has been cheated or fooled as we lead him step by step from our lead into our story and on to our conclusion. We are therefore building an extra safeguard against our readers feeling fooled if, in our concluding sentences, we can logically make some reference back to the subject with which we started, most likely the subject which constituted the basis of our headline. This wind-up whip would be the notable exception to the practice of getting completely through with one topic before we go on to the next. We would purposely end up with some reference back to point 1. Short-circuited, as applied to advertising copy, is an expression which Aesop Glim learned from Richard Rothschild, a writer who has made his mark in the fields of both advertising and philosophy. There are at least two circumstances under which a piece of advertising copy may be spoken of as being short-circuited. The first is when the writer gets from his opening to his conclusion too rapidly. He achieves this at the expense of having omitted some of the necessary intermediate subjects. The danger, of course, is that the reader is not prepared to accept the conclusion because he has not been given the necessary supporting arguments in the proper sequence and in advance of the conclusion he is asked to accept. This type of short-circuiting may be traceable either to the writer's assuming greater intelligence or greater knowledge than the reader possesses, or to the writer's carelessness. This can probably be called the lesser of the two evils, because we may assume that a certain number of readers are sufficiently intelligent to grasp and accept the conclusion without as much supporting evidence as the majority will need. A more dangerous and more frequent type of short-circuiting is that which permits the reader to escape before he has reached our conclusion. This is usually traceable to our having introduced extraneous thoughts which got his mind working on a tangent. We have led him astray. The copywriter defeats his own purpose by providing beguiling bypaths and side roads which get the reader's attention off the main subject and onto some extraneous line of thoughts. There are always plenty of idle thoughts floating around in the back of our reader's mind. The copywriter must be on guard not to make contact with any of these idle thoughts. He must be constantly checking to be sure that each word and each idea which he builds into his copy is leading clearly and accurately in only one direction. Now take a look at the 5 bits of advertising copy which you have selected as best. It is highly probable that none of these 5 can be called oleo copy, and that none of these 5 is in any way short-circuited. Unless you have very strange standards of judgment, it is quite likely that each of these 5 pieces of copy has a pretty clearly defined sequence of ideas, a plausible sequence leading step by step, as rapidly as the reader's ignorance permits, from the opening sentence to the closing sentence. The technique of construction may not be glaringly evident. The points may not be labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But a bit of analysis does reveal the fact that the copywriter had a very clear sense of direction, a sure sequence of ideas, no unnecessary padding, no sashaying. Whenever you find that you have produced a bit of oleo or short-circuited copy, throw it away. Start with a new diagramming of your ideas and sequence. Make certain that you like and have confidence in the new diagram. Then start writing anew from the diagram. One of the greatest advertising men Aesop Glim has ever known once said, "If you can place an advertisement in a publication and get a traceable response from 0.1% of the readers of that publication, you have an outstandingly successful advertisement." We may assume that each advertisement has some effect on a greater number of people than those from whom we get traceable responses. However, let us stick to the traceable results. If a publication has 200,000 circulation and an average of 3 readers per copy, we have 600,000 readers. 0.1% of 600,000 is 600. The chances are that 600 traceable replies would be a very adequate return for the cost of an advertisement in a publication of that size. The fact remains that there were 599,400 from whom we did not get traceable replies. We have the theoretical possibility of running more than 600 advertisements in this same publication before we have heard from all of its readers. The man who said 0.1% was a very experienced advertising man. However, if you quarrel with this percentage, make it as much larger as your own experience indicates. You still come out with the fact that when you run advertising, you are playing the law of averages. You get only a slice of the potential audience with each advertisement. You can run a great many advertisements before you find out what it means to exhaust the potentialities of a particular publication. As a matter of fact, there are several important cosmetics manufacturers who have had couponed advertisements in every issue of certain publications for 20 straight years, without seeing any drop-off in their coupon returns. You may be sure that the cosmetic sample you secure by sending in the coupon in 10 cents rarely offers any greater value than you get in the 10-cent store. Plus the fact that you have had the extra cost of postage. This statement is made in order to prevent anyone from charging that coupon returns. Holding up year after year represent actual selling rather than sampling to new prospects. The moral of all the foregoing is that we can rarely feel that the appearance of one advertisement, one time, has made any appreciable dent in the total audience represented by the publication in which that advertisement appears. There is always the danger of being too optimistic on this score. If we have prepared a good advertisement and published it in the right publication, it is hard to believe that the whole world did not see it. Actually, it is a safe bet that you can't run two advertisements in the same issue of a publication and expect to have any appreciable number of the readers see both advertisements. This is a very important answer to the charge that is sometimes made, to the effect that some two publications reach the same audience and have 40% duplication of readership. The simple fact is that if your advertisements are in both publications, you have merely increased the chances of having a small percent of their combined readership see even one of your advertisements. All of which points directly at the reason why most advertising is run either by campaigns or on a year-round basis. Now, when we come to think of advertising and campaigns, we must keep a clear perspective of the job which faces us. Think of our campaign as an army, in which each advertisement is a single soldier. Obviously, each soldier must have full equipment, must be completely equipped to fight. Then the battle is won by the multiplicity of individual soldiers thus equipped. Our fact-finding and our copy research have indicated the equipment each advertisement needs. Be sure that each advertisement gets that full equipment. Don't expect the advertisements to support each other. Don't feel that what you fail to say in one will somehow be covered in another. Referring back to our original reasoning, if each advertisement is capable of getting 1,000 replies, 12 advertisements are going to get you only 12,000. It is safer to believe that the 12,000 represent the maximum of what you have achieved, rather than the minimum, and that there are still 588,000 readers you have not touched. Thus, we arrive at the belief that almost no readers of the publication are going to see your whole campaign, that very few are going to see more than 2 or 3 advertisements, and that only a small percentage are going to act upon them. Simultaneously, it is probable that there is some one best way in which to tell your story. On this basis, it is completely safe to standardize a large part of your story. Change the illustration, the headline, the opening paragraph for freshness, if that seems desirable. But there is no basic reason why the main body of the copy needs to be constantly rewritten. Once you have found a truly effective way of telling the main part of your story, you may be accused of laziness, but the fundamental facts are on your side. In support of highly standardized copy, it is interesting to note that 2 or 3 of the very biggest advertisers are those most addicted to high standardization of the bulk of their message. If the advertiser who is spending millions is not afraid to stick to standardized copy, why should the advertiser spending thousands fear to do so? But don't overlook this fact. The use of standardized paragraphs or standardized text implies that every effort has been made to find the one most effective way of telling the story before that text is established as standard copy. Frequently, when an advertisement is repeated with no change whatever, the traceable returns are greater on the second appearance than on the first. Let us rule out all such influencing circumstances as position or weather. A full-page advertisement appeared on 2 successive Sundays, same weather, on the back page of the same section of a newspaper. This was in peacetime. No appreciable difference in the front page headlines on the 2 Sundays. On its second appearance, it produced 20% more replies than on the first. Why? We may reason as follows. Each advertisement has a certain pulling power, great or small. Let us assume that, given a decent break in position, an advertisement has a single appearance pulling power of 1,000 coupons. Each time it appears, a certain number of the readers see this advertisement for the first time, and 1,000 of them are induced to send in the coupon. Upon its second appearance, it still gets its 1,000 coupons from people who are seeing it for the first time. But, in addition, a certain number of people who saw it before and didn't act on it now do so. The first appearance made an impression. The second appearance reminded them to complete the action in which they were interrupted before. Try this on your memorizer. Here is the hook, the gaff, the final paragraph, the parting shot for which all else was built. The sole purpose of this doggerel is to drive home the fact that the final paragraph of our copy is potentially the most important part of our whole writing job. What we say in closing can be either the making or the undoing of our advertisement's whole endeavor. Most of the time, it is our desire to induce our prospects to think certain specific thoughts and or take certain specific actions. And it is frequently not until the final paragraph that we are in position to be 100% specific as to what it is we want our prospects to think or do. We must not fail to seize this opportunity. The preceding paragraph starts with most of the time. This is for the benefit of those who are now ready to break in and say, no, you're overstressing the importance of the closing paragraph. Our advertisements do things to people who don't even get to the final paragraph. Our layout, our artwork, our headline, our name display, our opening paragraph. Suppose a person sees only these. He receives an impression. In the course of time, he receives a series of impressions, and the cumulative value of all these impressions is incalculable. At this point, in response, Aesop Glim can get very angry, or he can burst into tears, or he can become very patient and repetitious and, if you will, condescending. When the job at hand can't be done with short, display, or reminder copy, the reason is found in the indifference and the ignorance of our prospects in regard to our wares. We meet this situation by constructing our copy, to overcome first the indifference and then the ignorance of our prospects. This obviously becomes a step-by-step process, arresting the prospect's attention, establishing a common meeting ground, winning confidence, then telling our basic story with plausible sequence, up to the point where indifference and ignorance are supplanted by interest and knowledge, and our prospects suddenly know as much as we do regarding the virtues of our wares. Now, at this point, are we going to leave our prospects to their own devices? It is quite all right, and undoubtedly true, to say that anything intelligent we have done up to this point has created some impression. But are we going to be satisfied with impression if there is any hope of producing action? Aesop Glim believes very strongly that whenever you have anything more than a display or reminder job to do, you are fully justified in making every possible endeavor, 1, to secure a reading for every word of your copy, and 2, to plant in the final paragraph the urgent invitation to specific action. He believes that you are in danger of losing nothing by this all-out effort. Conversely, he believes that you are very definitely in danger of getting considerably less than full value for the advertiser's dollar if you are satisfied to make anything less than the all-out effort. As a matter of fact, the proper use of the final paragraph is considerably more than a must. It's an opportunity. The hook you plant in your final paragraph, the invitation to your prospects to take some action you can trace, is your one wholly reliable means of finding out how many prospects read your advertisement. Further than that, it is your one wholly reliable means of comparing the effectiveness of 2 or more different pieces of copy. There are usually several ways to tell the same story. There are possible variations in every detail of layout, illustration, headline, and copy appeal. But they're not all equally powerful. Some one combination will build more sales per advertising dollar than all the others. How can you fail to keep hunting for this one strongest combination? How can your conscience let you trust to guesswork or to less evidence than is to be had for the seeking? Your final paragraph can invite your prospects to go to the dealer, to ask for a sample or a demonstration, or to make a purchase. Or it can invite them to write to the advertiser for a sample or a booklet, or more information in some other form. Few advertisements were ever long enough to tell all that could be told, and the finest advertisement is less effective than personal contact. If you've been able to lead your prospects into your final paragraph, you have their attention and their interest. That is your golden moment. Make the most of it to clinch the sale if the circumstances permit, or to lead prospects further toward the point at which the sale can be clinched. And when none of this applies to the proposition on which you are engaged, when, for instance, you're selling ideas rather than goods or services, you can still make use of the final paragraph. Use it solely in order to find out just how good you are as a copywriter. Make your readers do something, write for something, vote for something, go do something. Anything that will tell you that you had some readers and that your writing had the power to induce thought and action. Suppose a camera advertisement had the headline, "Keep your baby like he is today," or a cold remedy headline said, "At the first sneeze, do this quick," or a deodorant advertisement were headlined, "He acts different lately." Aesop Glim contends that the copywriter who puts faulty grammar into his copy is guilty of shortchanging the advertiser. The reasoning is that faulty grammar is poor taste, and that good taste always pays dividends in many more ways than the purely aesthetic. The copywriter might contend, "The people to whom I am writing do not always speak grammatically. They use like for as. They mix up their adverbs and adjectives. They make many other kinds of mistakes. I try to write copy that speaks their language, and I want them to know that the people in this firm are people just like them." Aesop Glim heartily subscribes to the principle of writing our copy in the language of our prospects. We must have full command of the language of those to whom we are writing. We must never talk down to them. We must never talk up to them. We must talk directly to them, as equals. Our prospects must never detect any artificiality in our speech. Vocabulary research is often a vital part of our fact-finding job. The qualification that covers a ban on faulty grammar is included in the words artificiality in our speech. Perhaps this can be clarified with a somewhat different injunction. Don't try to imitate a dialect unless you have complete mastery of that dialect. If you visit below the Mason and Dixon line, you soon get used to the use of you all. But you will have to live among Southerners for a very long time before you can say you all without arousing suspicions. You may associate with people who say ersters and earl, but if you're accustomed to saying oysters and oil, stick to your accustomed way. Otherwise, you may hurt someone's feelings. The use of faulty grammar by a person from whom correct grammar is expected is very much the same. You are instantly detected, something just doesn't ring true. When something in your advertisement does not ring true, you are in danger. Your prospects want to believe in the advertiser whose wares interest them. If they suspect that the advertiser is not correct in all ways, how can they be certain that he is dependable in his specialty? Maybe there is some old family remedy, one that has cured 8 generations, which is actually as effective as a similar product made by E.R. Squibb & Sons. But when our baby is sick, we'll take Mr. Squibb's product instead of the one made by someone whose grammar is as careless as our own. Correct grammar is good taste. There is nothing upstage about it. It inspires the confidence of those who use good grammar and of those who don't. Now, the use of colloquialisms is something else again. This is where vocabulary research proves its value. If a foundry man calls a certain ungainly object a shakeout, there's no point in your trying to coin a polysyllabic bit of double talk to describe the same product. There is a fair chance that he won't know what you're talking about. There is an excellent chance that he won't believe that you know anything about his business. The value of good taste in advertising is demonstrable in other details than grammar. A gentleman is supposed to remove his hat when greeting a lady. He is expected to walk on the outer side of the walk when promenading with a lady. On most occasions, a young lady sits erect. She doesn't slouch, etc., etc. Your advertising illustrations will gain by observing these courtesies and lose by violating them. The various books of etiquette are popular bestsellers. What are your prospects to think if they discover that the people in your illustrations don't observe the precepts in their book of etiquette? If any element in your advertisement is offensive to even 5% of your prospects, then your advertising has reduced your market by 5%. Advertising cannot afford to condone or contribute to any breakdown in good manners and good taste. Certainly, advertising, by the power of example, can foster a wider observance of good taste in all its forms. The practical advertiser will also keep in mind that the total church-going population, of all creeds, is a large population. Add to this figure all the non-churchgoers who also revere good taste. We find that quite a high percentage of our prospects can be either won or antagonized by the measure of taste our advertising displays. The weasel is most dependable in his undependability. It's always a safe bet that he won't be where you expect him to be or do what you expect him to do. Some words are like that. They have either no meaning or too many meanings. Through long overuse, they have come to mean anything or nothing. Perhaps we can mix our metaphor still further and say that some words are jacks of all trades and skilled at none. Sometimes these weasel words are adequate. Most of the time they can be supplanted by other words whose meanings are always clear, vivid, and dependable. To head the list, Aesop Glim nominates for a Hall of Disrepute the words good, better, and best. These should probably be followed by very, perfect, fine, and different. Of course, new is also widely used and frequently misused, but we'll exclude new from our nominations as long as it's used truthfully. As copywriters, we want to avoid weasel words because we want to know that our prospects will get from our copy exactly what we are trying to put into it. We dare not use words which are vague or capable of several interpretations, or from which our prospect can assume either more or less than what we have intended. The dictionary is potentially one of the copywriter's most useful working tools. Use it to check yourself on the meanings of common words, not just for the less common. You'll frequently get a surprise. Look up the definitions of good, better, and best. See if they are actually the powerful weapons you may have thought. Good is the opposite of evil. Better is good in a greater degree. Best is to the utmost degree. Fine is excellent or admirable, etc., etc. In the abstract, all are high spiritual concepts. In advertising copy, they are unreliable. They don't cut sharply. They don't register quickly. If they don't actually lose reader interest for us, they at least waste precious time. In every case, there's a synonym which will tell our reader what we mean, more vividly and instantly. The sure prescription for vivid writing is to stick to active verbs and pictorial nouns. When we do this, we don't need as many adjectives and adverbs. Active verbs suggest action. Pictorial nouns paint quick word pictures. Aesop Glim has on occasion been asked to hold forth on this subject. What is the difference between writing for the editorial pages of magazines or newspapers and advertising copy? We shall start with the statement that Aesop Glim knows no more about the rules of writing for magazines or newspapers than is observable by any reader of magazines or newspapers. So let us agree that this discussion starts from the viewpoint of an observer. He feels certain that there are some techniques in magazine and newspaper writing, definite rules and requirements which are more or less enforced by most editors. However, we can only contrast what we think we know about advertising writing with what we think we observe about magazine and newspaper writing. In preparing an advertisement, it is our job so to construct that advertisement that it will reach out from the page and arrest the attention of those to whom it is directed. We work upon the assumption that no one wants to read our writing. It is our job to catch our prospect's attention, hold that attention, and lead our prospect step by step from his original indifference to a point of interest in the goods we are advertising. In planning and preparing each advertisement, we must equip the advertisement to get itself seen and read and believed. Most editors probably have pretty much the same ideals, but there is evidence that the ideals are more often revered in the breach than in the observance. Fortunately for the advertising writer, the burden of proof never leaves his shoulders. Each advertisement either performs or it does not. He can know what he's doing. Unfortunately for the average magazine or newspaper writer, the penalty for an indifferent performance is not as marked. He is judged largely upon the average quality of his writings and the general progress and improvement he makes over a period of time. In addition, it often seems apparent that such a writer is leaning too heavily on the prestige of the publication in which his article appears. He may have something bright or amusing to say or a profound idea to put across, but he still assumes that its mere appearance in a certain publication will get it a reading. Perhaps he counts on his readers having more time and initiative than is actually the case. In too many magazine and newspaper articles, it appears that the writer recognizes no obligation to sell his wares. Certainly, the advertising copywriter cannot assume that his reader has either the time or the initiative to wade through a mess of verbiage to unearth the advertiser's actual message. Of course, the blame is not wholly the writer's. The final responsibility rests with the editor. But if we look at the editorial page presumably written by the editor himself, we find some of the most uneven writing of the day. The fact that the majority of the readers of most publications rarely read the editorial page is an indictment of the editors. Too many editorials range in readability from indifferent down to lousy. Here, apparently, where the editor has a chance to speak for himself. He is making the least attempt to sell his editorial matter to his readers. The editor may defend himself by saying that the average reader does not want to think. The truth of the matter must be that the editor does not care to write about the things the average reader cares to think about. If this is not true, then the editor must be guilty of writing about uninteresting subjects, too often picked solely to impress his fellow craftsmen. Or he is failing to write in such a way as to interest his readers in new subjects. By way of sharp contrast, Aesop Glim submits the editorial page of Life magazine. Week in and week out, this page seems to make a more consistent effort to sell its message, than do the editorial pages of most other publications. Perhaps the editors recognize the fact that it is a tough job to make editorial matter compete with news pictures. Perhaps the editors just plain care more. Whatever the cause, it seems that here is one editorial page which is consistently written in the hope of getting itself a reading by every reader every week. Whether it is the editorial page or the pages from the contributors, Aesop Glim has long believed that an editor should try to sell every article in his publication to every reader, and that too many editors fail to make the effort. The fact that birds of a feather flock together is nowhere more clearly demonstrated than by the readership of almost any publication. An editor's policies and methods soon attract their particular audience. This means that the editor can come to count on certain likes and dislikes in his average reader. If the editor oversells an article, he loses little. If the reader is induced to start an article and then discovers that it is not his meat, he will merely stop reading and move on to one that is. But what a shame if underselling has permitted him to miss an article he would have liked to read. Assuming that word-of-mouth advertising is a desirable goal, the editor gets his when a reader asks, "Did you read Smith's article in this week's issue of Jones Magazine?" How often this happens will rest primarily upon how many readers of Jones Magazine are induced to sample how many articles per issue. Surely exposition is not selling, and it appears to this observer that most magazines and newspapers merely expose their wares to their readerships. The advertising copywriter must think of his advertisement, not only as the advertiser's representative, with a character and unity to maintain, but also as a representative always equipped and willing to put on a good performance. Each and every advertisement must go forth thus equipped, ready to meet the challenge of winning a hearing from a totally indifferent audience. It is not enough that the advertisement shall merely appear in quiet dignity. An advertisement must sell itself at every appearance. We need only to look at the actor, the musician, or the singer to get a concept of the importance of this principle. At the opera house, Tucker or Tibaldi may be forgiven for an indifferent performance. That is because the audience knows the traditions of the opera and the past performance of each of the stars. But if an opera star wishes to widen his audience, on the concert stage or on the radio, for example, each appearance becomes a completely new challenge. The audience is new. The star stands or falls with each new audience on each individual performance. If the artist meets this challenge, he gains new followers. If his performance is listless or indifferent, he has made no gain. He might better not have appeared at all. Once upon a time, one of the country's lesser railroads, known chiefly as a hauler of coal, decided to promote its passenger services. This was a major policy decision, calling for a wholly new start in advertising tactics. Fundamentally, it was pretty much the old problem of how to get Lizzie into society. If we stick to that simile, we can also say that speed was essential, and the money for a super elaborate debut was not on hand. That was bad, but fortunately, an innovation was about to be introduced. Sleeping cars with genuine air conditioning. The F principle was applied to the problem. What are the common denominators of traveling comfort? What current expression most quickly says complete rest and is richest in applicable associated meanings? Our language is full of picturesque expressions regarding sleep. Among many, you can sleep like a top, like a baby, like a kitten. Suddenly, you have the makings of both copy and art themes. You can sleep like a kitten on the Chesapeake in Ohio. From which one further step leads you to the now famous Chessie of C&O advertising. Elmo Ecker, formerly head of his own advertising agency, was the one who successfully applied the F principle to C&O advertising. And it is to Mr. Ecker that old Aesop Glim is indebted for the title of the F principle, and the following rules governing its application and its misapplication. F stands simply for familiar. What is the copy theme that will most quickly establish a common meeting ground with our prospects? Of course, we can invent a word like Kodak or Euban or Cutex, and then set out to make it mean exactly what we want it to mean. When we've done so, we have a very real and exclusive asset. But, given less time and perhaps less money, where can we most quickly meet our prospects on familiar ground, and thence lead them to the unfamiliar? Is there a current expression we can adopt? Or one we can adapt with the change of only a word or two? Many of the great headlines are adaptations and perversions of familiar sayings. Sometimes the change of only a word or two gives greatly increased effect, lends fresh meaning to what would otherwise be merely a bromide. As a matter of fact, what is sometimes called corn and what is sound advertising are often pretty close together. They are never identical. The tests for validity in applying the F principle are: is the expression in current use? Does it ring true in its new application? Is it basic enough for a campaign theme? Will it be remembered for more than today? The F principle is not a shortcut to a quickie. It is the economy route to effective advertising, but it is a positive, not a negative, advertising principle. It is a valid principle that works and one that has stood the test of time. To some people, it may seem old-fashioned and a little too obvious, but no one has ever been able to challenge the power of the obvious when accurately directed. Those who scorn the F principle are apt to be the boys and girls whose eyes are always on the advertising awards instead of on the public. Bearing in mind that the main objective of the F principle is speed, quick acceptance by the public, copywriters would do well to avoid being profligate with the advertiser's profits. When you are given the opportunity to write copy, be sure you know what the opportunity is. It's not one for self-glorification. It has something to do with the profit and loss column in the advertiser's financial statement. The hat trick always pays dividends. Whenever you leave your desk, put on your hat, go out and ask questions of people. You come back with more answers than you had questions. The late Ralph E. Reindfuss of Fact Finders Inc. once directed a copy research job that brought home some particularly valuable and quite unexpected bacon. There's a cue for art directors as well as for copywriters in this one. The immediate objective was to pretest headlines for a campaign addressed to men, something to do with shaving. In 7 cities out of 8, one particular headline was clearly the leader. In the 8th city, a very different kind of headline stood out. This headline had to do with the kind of face she wants to snuggle up to. A careful check of all the circumstances disclosed this fact. In the first 7 cities, the interviewing had been done either by men or by older women. In the 8th city, the interviewer was a most attractive, snuggly young woman. When another interviewer redid the 8th city, the answers lined up with those from the first 7 cities. Far be it from old Aesop Glim to miss any opportunity to adorn a tale. The attractive, snuggly young woman was the proper illustration for the snuggle headline. When she asked the questions, they had to come out as they did. The morals are several. The copywriter and the artist, or the art director and the copy chief, must combine their efforts, must conspire. There is nothing colder than an advertisement to which each has made his contribution egotistically. The art director must consider how he can interpret, clarify the meaning, and speed the understanding of the headline. The copywriter must consider how his headline will read, without benefit of art. Can it stand on its own feet? Can it possibly pick up an unexpected meaning if the publication layout man places it beside unrelated editorial or advertising illustrations? Then, how far can the headline be enriched and clarified with the help of the art director, provided the copywriter has taken the trouble to tell the art director what effect he is after? We can buy a good many things on the installment plan. Can we also sell that way? When you see an advertisement bearing the notation, "This is number 12 in a series," what is your reaction? Whether it's number 1 or number 12, old Aesop Glim always feels that there is no point in reading it. He will surely miss, or has already missed, all the rest of the series. Advertisements in series rarely appear in successive issues of a given publication. The advertiser almost never tells when the preceding advertisement appeared or when the next one will appear. The writing may be good, but the story's the thing. And the whole story's the whole thing. Picture a door-to-door electrical appliance salesman saying, "Today I want to tell you about the motor. I'll be back 11 more times to tell you the 11 other parts of our sales story." Old Aesop Glim still strings along with one of his earliest and greatest teachers who said, "Each advertisement should be written as though it were the first and last advertisement to appear on that subject." Naturally, this does not mean that you can tell everything that could possibly be said in every advertisement. You must tell enough to be content to rest your case with what your prospect gets out of his reading of this one advertisement. You may write a dozen advertisements at a time, but never lose sight of the fact that they go out one by one to meet your prospects, and that the law of averages indicates that there is very little chance that any single prospect will see more than 1 in 10 of your advertisements. Aesop Glim has one further major objection to advertisements written and labeled as a series. The moment you earmark an advertisement as this, you have made the advertisement a self-conscious salesman. Its whole tone of voice has altered. You have deliberately called the attention of your prospects to your salesman at the expense of your sales story. You have probably heard many a speaker get off to a slow start. However, you were too comfortable or too polite to get up and walk out on him. Eventually, he warmed up to his subject, and you went home feeling the evening was well spent. As a student of advertising, you have probably read many an advertisement that got off to a slow start. Toward the end, it may have contained some compelling paragraphs. But the point is, the prospective purchaser of the goods advertised never gets past the slow start. He has no incentive of either comfort or politeness to keep him reading until the story gets a little better. The copy you write must strike a delicate, happy medium. It can be so slow and ponderous that you lose your reader. It can be so telegraphic, starting so far toward the middle of your story, that you never catch him at all. He doesn't know what you're talking about. An experienced copy chief usually takes an extra good look at the opening sentence or the first paragraph of every piece of copy written by a beginner. Very often, by simply cutting out the opening sentences, he finds the right starting point. The writer will do well to question the value of the opening words in his first draft. There is another process profitably followed by some experienced writers. Start putting down words and sentences just as rapidly as possible. In your first draft, put in introductory remarks which you know you are not going to leave in. You can even start with a description of the person to whom you are writing. Then tighten your sequence. Then hunt for the true first sentence that means a fast-starting piece of copy. Aesop Glim will always be among the first to contend that advertising must always go just as far as conditions permit toward the completing of a sale. This is, of course, the basis for salesmanship in print, the definition often used by Marco Dia and others. The honest copywriter will never let himself off too easily with any alibi about the cumulative power of advertising. However, when we endeavor to set up a possible glossary definition of advertising, we are immediately reminded that advertising does sometimes have the somewhat lesser function of predisposing minds towards man, etc. Let us agree that advertising should usually make every possible attempt to sell, but must always interpret. As a matter of fact, good selling is usually good interpretation, and vice versa. It is our custom to glorify the salesman. He's the boy who leads the romantic life. He always brings home the bacon, no matter how great the odds, how hard the going. And the more dramatic and tricky his methods, the more widely he is acclaimed. The copywriter must be on his guard against identifying himself and his technique too closely with those of the personal salesman. Your copy can fail to sell if it fails to interpret, if it does not truly expound, explain, and educate. It is probably safe to write against this proposition. If my prospect really is a prospect, he will want to be a customer once I make the reasons clear. We are not discussing display or reminder copy. We are talking about the kind of message that cannot be delivered in 14 words or less. We have the job of writing a letter to our prospect, which will interpret what we have to sell in terms of what he wants to buy. You can fail to sell your soap, for instance, if you fail to interpret it in terms of the cleanliness your prospect wants to buy. Many factors can beguile the copywriter from the straight and narrow path. Aesop Glim was once looking over the advertisement of a firm making precision instruments. The engineering in these products is so fine, The new developments and applications so interesting that the copywriter, and the salesman too, are constantly rambling off into enthusiastic discourses on what the instrument is and how it works, instead of what it does and why the prospect needs it. As against the drama and glory with which we may surround the personal salesman, the copywriter should keep in mind that the one sure basis of interpretation is simplicity. Know your prospect. Talk to him in his own language about his own needs. Stick to the idea that you are writing him a letter on a subject he knows little about. Keep the conviction that he will want to buy when he knows as much as you do about what your product will do for him. Your letter must replace his ignorance with both knowledge and conviction. Practice the art of writing it simple. Take an easy subject like why a table has 4 legs. Make that simple, interesting, logical, and convincing. Then take something a little more difficult. Write an exposition and interpretation of the weather forecast as presented by the Weather Bureau's maps. The weather does concern your prospect. Try putting into simple language a cold front, a warm front, a stationary front, an occluded front, isobars, the Beaufort scale, etc., and their significances. If you think you know how to write, here is a real challenge. Aesop Glim has never been able to understand any weather forecast more complicated than fair and warmer. Perhaps others suffer this way too. You want a lot of people to read your advertisement and act upon it. Be sure you write to them one at a time. Don't address your message to the general public. It's not my dear readers. You write to the law of averages, but your advertisement is effective on only one person at a time. Keep yourself in the frame of mind of talking to one person at a time. Try to make your reader feel that you are talking to, appealing to, his own peculiar tastes and sense of values. Aesop Glim is always complaining about the use of bad grammar in advertising copy. It is his contention: 1. That advertising must not set a bad example. 2. That the confidence we want our prospects to have in advertised products must not be jeopardized by any lack of confidence in our grammar or manners. Aesop Glim is always gnashing his teeth over the frequent grammatical errors in radio commercials. It is to be assumed that many of these errors originate with the announcer rather than with the copywriter or the advertiser. But the fact remains that the commercial is the advertiser's message, and the final responsibility is all his. He must protect himself against announcers who speak incorrectly, particularly when ad-libbing. None of this is a plea for erudition or elegance or stilted speech. Our copy must speak the language of our prospects, but short of being bad grammar. As against stilted speech, we have colloquialisms. Aesop Glim's reference books define colloquialisms as words used in everyday conversation. Broadly, colloquialisms are not incorrect. Technically, they are neither vulgar nor slang. They are merely words not normally used in formal address. Whenever the nature of our message permits, we definitely gain in both confidence and understanding by using the colloquialisms our prospects regularly use when talking about our kind of product and its use. Those faithful servants of communication are always near at hand, each ready to sound its one particular note the instant you call it up. Maybe you're just lazy. Maybe what you're trying to say is dishonest, or something otherwise better left unsaid. Most likely your ideas are not yet in order. You're not ready for the words. The words are the notes, but the ideas are the fingers that produce the music. Bob Hope and Red Skelton deliver their jokes with vim, force, pep, zoe, and blam. Their comedy is good, their showmanship tops. Every listener gets every point. Jack Benny and George Gobel are relatively quiet. Half the humor in their performances is so subtle that no one gets it except Aesop Glim. This makes Aesop Glim feel extra good. Toward himself, toward Mr. Benny, toward Mr. Gobel, toward their sponsors. The moral has to do with advertising, not with entertainment. Sometimes your copy and/or your layout can gain more by underplaying than by all-out zoom. The word is sometimes. Your advertisement must first catch your prospect's attention. You can hardly go to work on him until you have his attention. A Schwab and Beatty House advertisement once said, "It isn't enough to cram appeal into the body copy. It's the headline that gets people into the copy. The copy doesn't get them into the headline." Good showmanship is vital in headline and layout. Use any attention-arresting method, any eye-catching device that fits both your proposition and the kind of person you want to reach. There are times when the most effective playing is with your foot on the soft pedal. The reason may be no more profound than to sound different from your competition. When competing advertisements are currently running predominantly in the opposite direction, the simplest, most unassuming layout may have the greatest eye-catching power. It is by this same token that the most powerful writing sometimes sounds the quietest. If you can make each reader feel that he is the only one who gets all the subtleties in your paragraphs, you are selling not only by the merits of your proposition, but by the flattery that always earns its own extra dividend of goodwill. A copywriter in an advertising agency was writing an advertisement in which the subject was color. The product was multicolored. For headline and main illustration material, he hit upon the lilies of the field, recalling something to the effect that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these, which incidentally was a sound approach on the F principle. A little library research and some consultations with horticultural authorities brought forth the surprising fact that there are not the 3 or 4 kinds of lilies we might all be able to name, but dozens. The comforting fact, however, was that they do range widely in color and would make a highly colorful and interesting illustration. So he had his layout made up showing many, many different kinds of lilies. He took his layout and copy to the advertiser, who was delighted and gave a quick okay. Being an experienced copyman, he knew that his illustration must be completely authentic. Authenticity in illustration detail implies authenticity of product. Vice versa, a lack of authenticity in illustration detail. For an indisputably accurate portrayal of many kinds of lilies, a Kodachrome seemed the safest basis for the illustration. All we do is assemble the lilies and shoot the Kodachrome. Then no one will ever be able to challenge the shape, size, or color of a single petal. Probably no one florist will have them all in stock, but the flower show's only 2 weeks off. We'll rent them from the exhibitors for an hour or two, and the whole job will be finished. Unfortunately, another call on the authorities disclosed the fact that only a few kinds of lilies come into bloom in any one part of the country at any one time of the year. To assemble enough lilies for the illustration would involve flying them in from all points of the compass on a tight schedule at a cost of several $1,000s. The cost of the Kodachrome was acceptable. The cost of assembling the props was too many times the cost of the space to be filled. Dilemma. Just short of manly tears, the copywriter reported the facts to the head of the agency. The boss replied, "Down in Wall Street, there's a saying, 'He who sells what isn't his'n must pay the price or go to prison.' You've sold the client something we can't deliver, either at the price he expects to pay or at any price he should pay for this particular kind of job. There's only one way for you to get us out of this pickle. New copy and a new layout. Something the client will like even better than this one he's so pleased with. Be sure it's awfully good, and this time find out before you sell it whether you can deliver it. For almost any product or service you may advertise, you have 2 separate audiences: the fans and the unsophisticated. The fans are those who are already partly or wholly sold on your proposition. Some of the proof that they are fans is the fact that they will read almost anything written on the subject of which they are fans. The unsophisticates are those who are not even partly sold on your proposition. In fact, they may not even be aware that they are prospects. Aesop Glim's contention is that since you can't split your advertisement in half and direct one half to the fans and one half to the unsophisticates, you had better address the whole advertisement to the unsophisticates. The fans will still read it and possibly learn something they didn't know. As to what you may say that they already know, they merely pat themselves on the back and congratulate themselves on knowing so much. Now, along comes McCall's magazine with the perfect proof, in Aesop Glim's opinion, that Aesop Glim is right. It seems that a good many recipes have been written this way, 100% for the fans. Beat egg yolks until lemon-colored, score ham. Cream butter and sugar, blanch almonds. Dredge meat. Fold in egg whites. But they're written this way in McCall's, 100% for the unsophisticates. Beat egg yolks until they're so thick you can actually lift them up with the beater. Score the fat on top of the ham by cutting across the surface to make a diamond pattern. Soften or cream the butter with your hand. When soft, add sugar a small amount at a time. Continue creaming until mixture is very light and fluffy, and grains of sugar have almost disappeared. To skin or blanch almonds, cover with cold water and bring to a boil. Drain. Skins will then slip off as easily as a glove. Roll the meat in flour, coating all sides. Stir egg whites in gently. Professionals call this fold, so the air beaten into the whites is not lost. Do you think any fan is going to be antagonized by the new style? Certainly a lot of unsophisticates may not know what score or cream means. It is equally possible that some of the fans have forgotten their exact meanings. This latter fact brings out one of the great advantages advertising has over personal selling. You cannot challenge your prospect face to face with ignorance. However, a simple statement of fact in an advertising message on a subject regarding which your prospect may quite possibly be partially or totally ignorant is read in private both eagerly and gratefully. Polishing is good for pots and pans and shoes and precious stones. It's bad for copy. Polished copy is dead copy. The life and sparkle have all been polished out. Polished copy is copy someone has tried to improve after it was good enough. This someone may be the original writer of the piece, an associate, or the boss himself. The crime and damage are no less when done by the original writer. There comes a time when either the copy is good enough or it never will be. Run it or kill it. There's always another piece of copy. There's always room for improvement is one of those sacred cows we revere too blindly. It needs to be challenged. As with most generalities, it's partly true a lot of the time, wholly true sometimes, and sometimes it's wholly untrue and definitely misleading. In this case, let's see what we mean by copy that is good enough. Also, what kinds of improving, polishing, are bad for copy. Aesop Glim believes strongly that every piece of writing, when painstakingly produced and finally satisfactory to the writer, has some measure of character, unity, and vitality. Since advertising is communication, it is essential that our message be transmitted with character, unity, and vitality. The cold recital of facts, virtues, or ideas can seldom be as effective as when those same facts, virtues, or ideas are warmed with enthusiasm and presented by a person whose character and personality carry through to the audience. If we take this as our first premise, we will fight to preserve the character, unity, and vitality in each piece of writing. As our second premise, let us remind ourselves that our copy is not literature. It is a means to an end. It must transmit ideas without calling attention to itself. If we don't want our audience to be conscious of our copy, but only of our message, our copy must be warm and vital without being self-conscious. If you will recall a few actors you have seen, you will quickly spot the significance and value of warmth and vitality without self-consciousness. When we set out to polish copy, our own or someone else's, we are in grave danger of 1. Killing its character and unity, 2. Killing its warmth and vitality, 3. Making it a piece of self-conscious literature. Polishing is the attempt to improve a piece of copy that is already good enough. Polishing may take the turn of seeking just the right word or phrase, the balanced and even poetic sentence structure, the grammatically ideal punctuation. Polishing may take the turn of removing all colloquialisms, of injecting a second writer's pet words, phrases, and fetishes. The copy gets colder and colder. It gets more stilted and self-conscious. It is being patched, and the patchwork soon becomes highly visible. Copy can rarely be invisibly patched, shortened, or lengthened. If it's to be changed, it must be rewritten, reconstructed to the new specifications. Patched copy is as messy as a typewritten sheet covered with erasures and retyping. Arthur Kleinwald had an article in Printer's Ink titled, "Good Copy Should Sound Like a Letter." Out of his many points, Aesop Glim is herewith borrowing and twisting a few sentences to fit this discussion. First, dull and dry and pompous copy from the copywriter who tends to write as if he's making a speech. Aesop Glim believes this kind of copy often results from misguided overpolishing. The dullness, dryness, and pomposity are the only residue after polishing out the life and sparkle. Second, the writer who forgets whom he's writing to. If there were suddenly a general agreement that copy should not be polished, the life of many a copywriter would become less tortured and a lot pleasanter. but his primary responsibility would be no less. Before he's even ready to write, the copywriter must take the time to saturate himself with the facts about the product and the facts about the audience. If he truly does this, the copy will ultimately all but write itself, and that copy will ring true. If he fails to do so, he has no chance to produce copy that is good enough. And the trouble is not only that he won't remember whom he's writing to, he'll be writing mostly to himself. He'll be merely doodling with words. This probably applies in part to another type of copywriter, described by Mr. Kleinwald as the writer who still feels he's America's great, undiscovered novelist or poet. More often than not, he is writing only to himself. He, too, is merely doodling. We may assume that most attempts to polish a piece of copy are motivated by high ideals. We must recognize the dangers of destroying its life and vitality, and of producing either stilted literature or obvious patchwork. We must kill these false ideals. Simultaneously, we must strengthen the copywriter's consciousness of his great responsibility. He must be sure he's ready to write before he starts writing. He must take the time to know the product and the audience. Then he must diagram his writing, organize his facts or ideas for sequence, build his copy policy. Finally, working from the copy policy, he must write 100% to the audience, asking himself word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, just what each word and phrase will do to the audience. His writing will be accompanied by prayer and perspiration. But when he is finally satisfied with his writing, it's quite apt to be good enough. Sometimes you hit it on the first draft. Sometimes it takes a lot of fumbling and messing around before you get a piece of writing to hang together. But once you think you have it, recopy it in longhand at least 3 times. There are 2 separate reasons for this procedure. The first is fairly obvious. Each time you recopy each word, you automatically or subconsciously challenge that word. This leads to changes and improvements in your selection of words as words. The second and more important reason is this. You want the whole piece of writing to hang together with plausible sequence. While you're writing the first part, you don't truly know what the last part will say. You write in sequence, usually from first paragraph to last paragraph. Only when you have a complete draft can you appraise all the parts. Now recopy, and suddenly you begin to be sure that the seeds you plant in the early paragraphs actually bear fruit in the latter paragraphs. Also, that the conclusions you reach in the latter paragraphs have their logical premises in the opening paragraphs. A good many advertisements fail to make their points. A good many set forth unjustified conclusions. Recopying your copy, at least 3 times, helps you spot the flaws in your construction. Pulling on his long gray beard, old Aesop Glim herewith presumes to list what he considers the mistakes most frequently made by beginners in the art of copywriting. Topping the list of errors is the use of opening sentences that are much too long. Watch for long sentences in your writing, particularly in the opening paragraphs. Long sentences are hard to read because it is hard to keep track of their construction. Whenever you find a sentence that is too long, look for the ands and buts. You can almost always substitute a period for an and or a but. If you don't find any ands or buts, reconstruct your whole story into shorter sentences. You are far safer to work always on the assumption that no one wants to read your copy. Therefore, how you say it is almost as important as what you say. Probably most of the mistakes made by beginners are those of making their writing harder than necessary to read. You must work for easy reading. You must avoid everything that can either slow up the reading or send your reader off on some sideline of thought. Along with sentences that are too long is the use of sentences that are too involved in their construction. Don't start a sentence with a long dependent clause or phrase, such as, "Being desirous of assuaging my thirst, I decided to..." Be careful about the use of phrases as nouns. As to headlines, too many questions, too many commands. It is human nature to try to think up an answer to a question. The process of thinking up the answer reduces the chances of getting your copy read. It is human nature to resent commands. Resentment can prevent a reading of your copy. Still on headlines, beware of false caps. When you put a capital initial on every word of a headline, you are employing unfamiliar typography. Your reader accepts the unfamiliar more slowly than he accepts the familiar. You are also making the mistake of giving each word equal emphasis, whereas there are usually some words that ought to have more emphasis than others. If you emphasize everything, you actually emphasize nothing. Still on headlines? Break for sense. Many times your headline is too long to be reproduced on a single line. It is the copywriter, rather than the layout man, who should decide how to break the headline into 1, 2, or 3 lines. Breaking for sense means knowing that none of the shorter lines thus produced will become confusing or humorous combinations of words. Several common mistakes can be covered by one broad injunction. Use active verbs and pictorial nouns. Active verbs suggest action. They make your copy vivid and readable. The most active verbs of all are those in the present tense. Active verbs in the present tense make your reader feel that something is going on, something is happening, something he ought to know about. Pictorial nouns paint pictures. As with the present tense, so with the singular rather than the plural. One of anything is usually easier to visualize than multiples. Multiples have a tendency to become abstractions. Still on pictorial nouns, stick to the specific and the concrete. Your reader can't visualize power or dignity or prestige 1/10 as easily as he can visualize the simplest specific example of any of these. Frequently in a beginner's copy, it is apparent that the writer was himself confused. If the writer does not have his story clear in his own head before he starts writing, there is very little hope that he will make the story clear to his reader. Get the story straight in your own mind before you start telling it to someone else. Two other sources of confusion in copy have somewhat similar origins. The first is the writer's own confusion regarding the reader's degree of interest in his subject. Too much copy is written entirely from the teller's point of view. He is full of his story, convinced of the virtue of his wares, but he has failed to give much thought to the reader's interest. Most good selling starts on the prospect side of the desk. Before you can pound home the virtues of your wares, you must register an understanding of your prospect's needs. Base your approach upon his selfish interest. A somewhat allied source of confusion in copy results from the writer's failure to say what he had in mind. The teller may be full of his story, convinced of its importance. But if it's all news to the hearer, you can hardly hope to put across the whole story unless you tell the whole story. Too frequently, the writer fails to get onto the paper what he had in his head, or possibly he gets only part of it onto the paper. You can be sure that your reader can't take any more off the paper than you put onto it. Always ask yourself, have I really said what I mean? Have I said enough to make the reader feel as I feel? Verbal fluency, including the excessive use of adjectives and adverbs, is no substitute for facts. A good deal of copy seems to be written on the basis that adjectives and adverbs have power in themselves. This is true only to a degree. Many of the most powerful pieces of copy are notably lacking in adjectives and adverbs. Finally, on the subject of making copy hard to read, a too frequent crime is the use of stilted, unfamiliar language. This principle is the same as with unfamiliar typography above. It is your aim to have the reader get your story as easily and as rapidly as possible. Certainly this means that you must talk his language. You must never talk down to your reader. And even without any thought of talking down to him, you may use words whose meaning he does not quickly grasp. Whereupon he stops and puzzles. Heaven help you if he detours to the dictionary to look up the meaning of one of your words. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check our link in the description, where you'll find many other fundamental advertising books in different languages. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more persuasion and marketing-related content. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video.